Action! Hi everybody, it's me, JBR, coming at you with another Theater Thursday. As you know, every Thursday I do a movie review. This time I'm going to be doing Disney Pixar's Up. I love this movie. It's a really good movie. If you haven't seen this movie, if you don't know anything about it, consider this your spoiler alert. There it is. Watch it float away. Bye. Okay. So the movie Up stars, he starts off as a boy. His name is Carl. And he's a little boy, and he's like really shy, and he doesn't really have any friends, and he doesn't really talk to anybody, at least as we know of. One day when he's walking home from watching a movie of his, I guess a documentary about his hero, Charles Muntz. One day he's walking home, and he hears like screaming and yelling from an old abandoned house, on the street, in the neighborhood that he's passing. And so he goes inside to investigate, and he sees a girl, and he hears like all the catchphrases that Charles Muntz says, like, adventure is out there and stuff like that. So so while he's looking around, she scares him. This girl's name is Ellie, and she is very loud and you're in your face, and she is like, what are you doing? Like, you think you could just, think you're a super fan because you wear a pair of goggles? And then so she's like, all right, you're in. And they create an adventure club type of thing. And so she, he, again, is afraid. He's very shy. He doesn't talk much. And she's like, hey, I don't bite. And then she takes off a pin that she has. It's like a grape soda bottle cap, and she pins it on his sweater, and she's like, you and me, we're in a club now. And then so she's like, when she scared him, he lost his balloon. So they went up, or it went up to the ceiling, so they go up to go get it, and it's a broken floor, but there's one floorboard, and then Carl tries to go get it, but then he falls through the glasses. Sorry, that's the train. But he falls through the board, right? And then he breaks his arm. But then one day, at his house, Ellie, surprises him with a balloon, and it's tied to a stick, and it bumps him in the cast, and then it surprises him, and he accidentally punches himself in the face. And then Ellie's like, hey kid, I got something to show ya. And then she's like, I've never shown this to any living soul ever in my life. And so she pulls it around, and she's like, my adventure book. And then she's like, and then it's got all the stuff she admires and what the stuff that she plans to do. It's got Charles Muntz in it, and it's got her plan of she wants to go to Paradise Falls he's gone to Paradise Falls, so she wants to go there, but she doesn't know how to get there. So, but she makes Carl promise that to take her there. So he crosses her heart, and then I guess they kind of become friends, I guess. And then you flash forward years later, and then now they're together and they're married. So, in this part of the movie, it's very there's no dialogue. Everything, it's like a montage of their life together. And so you just see them kind of grow up and, in a way, grow old. And as they've been married a while, as they grow up together, they start to think about having a family and stuff like that. And there's happy parts of this scenario, and there's bad parts of this no dialogue scene. The happy part is, oh yay, they're married. But then what Disney did great was that they had that balance of good and, I guess, sadness. And unfortunately, when they try to start to have a family and when they want to have kids, Ellie goes to a doctor, and she's told that she has fraternity issues. If you don't know what fraternity issues are, it's when you physically can't have kids. And obviously that's very devastating because they really wanted to have them. But, Carl cheers her up. See, this is one of those uplifting moments that I was just talking about. He brings her adventure book to her, and so they start saving up in a giant jar of change. And it says Paradise Falls on it, and so they try to save up, and then every time they somewhat get close, something happens, their tire on their car bust, or their roof got crushed in by a tree, or Carl broke his leg, or something happened, and eventually these kinds of scenarios kept happening, eventually where you flash it to where they're older and they're in retirement. And, one day they're, like, cleaning the house, right, as old people. And this is another one of those touches I love, that they focus on people and, like, the aging of people. They're old people and they're dusting around the house, and Carl picks up an old picture of Ellie of, like, when they were young. And he realizes how much time has gone by and, like, how he still hasn't brought her to Paradise Falls. And so he decides to finally buy the tickets, and he was going to surprise her with them. And he was going to, like, surprise them at a picnic. But sad part, he was going to introduce the tickets, like he was going to surprise her with it. Unfortunately, Ellie gets hurt, and then you cut to the hospital. And then he does the same thing that she did as kids. He tied a stick to a balloon and he floated it to her. And she was reading her adventure book, so it, like, clips the end, and then she looks up, and then he's in the doorway. And then this part gets really sad. She cups his face, and then she, like, gives him the adventure book, kind of in a way, I think, symbolizing that she knew that, whatever. And so she was, like, kind of passing it on, like, the message or whatever, or the imagination, the thought. Unfortunately, Ellie dies, and then because they didn't have children, and I assume their parents are long gone, nobody was at the funeral. And I always find that the saddest part of the film, personally. So nobody was at the funeral except Carl. Carl was the only one at this memorial service. But then, now that Ellie's gone, it's a few years later, I think. And Carl is, like, kind of mean, and he's kind of grouchy, like a grouchy old man. And, like, he's not happy with the way that the world is. Like, it's not that simple suburban life that it used to be when Ellie was around. People have progressed, and, like, now they're building, like, cities and malls and, like, restaurants around their house. So, like, it's their little house, but then you see construction all around. That's not how it used to be. And obviously, Carl is, in a way, trying to preserve his house, because the companies that are building these restaurants and these banks and these whatevers, they're like, they want to get his house, they want to put him in a retirement home or in an old people's home, and then they kind of, like, want to bulldoze over his house so they can build over it. Obviously, Carl's not going to let that happen, because I think he really personally connects, I guess, in a way, the spirit of Ellie with the house. And anyway, so one day he accidentally hurt somebody when the construction people are, like, bringing in a tractor. It accidentally hits the mailbox, and Carl gets really upset when he's trying to put it back, and another dude is, like, touching it, and I guess in a way that's invading his personal space. So, like, Carl takes his cane and hits him over the head, and the guy gets hurt. So I guess, like, I don't want to say the cops, but I guess, like, the law people, like, they think it's best that, like, Carl is, like, looked after. Like, they don't think it's, like, stable for him to be living on his own anymore. I think, especially after this accident. They already were thinking about it, but now that he did this, it's kind of like he's not safe to be unsupervised in a type of sense. So when he was about to be shipped off to the retirement home, because he's actually a retired balloon salesman, he had the idea of going to Paradise Falls in his own unique way. He tied a bunch of balloons to his chimney, and he made his house fly. And then so the house had like bed sheets that, like, helped turn from side to side, and it was controlled by those weather rooster things that you see on top of houses. I mean, everyone is different, but he's got, like, a rooster that, like, spins the way that the winds do, those things. But while he's sitting relaxing, just enjoying the winds, he hears a knock at the door, and you're thinking, why would he hear a knock at the door? He's in the middle of the air. Nobody should be hearing. He shouldn't be hearing anything. he's thinking, oh, maybe it's just the wind, or maybe there's something knocked up against the door or whatever. But then he hears it again. And then so he goes to see, and then it's actually this little kid. His name is Russell. Now, Russell is a character that, like, he technically encountered before, but, like, he tried to get rid of him. Carl, back when he was on the ground, he's a wilderness explorer, or Russell is a wilderness explorer. So he, I guess, is, like, the Disney version of, like, a Boy Scout. And so he said, oh, you see these badges? You may notice one is missing. If I get this badge, I'll become a senior wilderness explorer. And then so to try to get rid of him, Carl says, you ever hear of a snipe? Obviously, everybody knows that. I think that's a popular cartoon thing to make up an animal like a snipe. I've heard that in cartoons. He's like, oh, it always eats my flowers. If you clap 3 times and you follow it down the street, it'll come out and try to catch it. So Russell follows him, being a little kid that he is. But obviously he, when the house went up, he like followed what he thought was a snipe under the porch. Obviously it wasn't. It was like a possum or something. But he's like holding on to the house, and he's like, can you please let me in? And Carl's like, no. And then he slams the door, but then he opens it up, and then Russell runs in. And then, obviously, Carl is now trying to think of ways to, like, get rid of him, like, trying to, like, drop him off back home, and in a way it's kind of an annoyance now that they're hundreds of feet in the air. And, so, he starts cutting balloons, or making sure the balloons are okay, but then a storm starts to come in, and when stuff starts to, like, fall, and he tries to, like, hold it down, he wakes up after, like, the bad storm, and he's like, oh, I thought you were dead, Russell says. And he's like, oh, I steered the house, and then they end up in South America, but, you can't tell where they are, so he starts cutting a few balloons, and then he's like, saying to Russell, oh, I'll give you change for the bus, and like, oh, no, I could just use my bus pass, that type of small talk. But then when they're going down, they notice these huge rock things, and they're like, oh, buildings or something. They thought they were higher up than they were, but they actually were pretty close to the ground, and so they hit the ground very fast, and then the house started to, like, skid, like, move away, and then Carl grabbed the hose, and he held it, like, and he held it back, and then, like, so he stopped it from flowing away, and then Russell grabbed Carl so he wouldn't flow it away, and then they pulled it back, and then when the fog clears, he sees Paradise Falls, like it's right on the other side of this huge I guess it's a ravine. It's like a giant curve, like a sink in the ground, and then like it kind of makes a C shape. Moving on.
Canyon.
Yeah, canyon. Okay, thanks. Well, yeah. Well, when I think canyon, I think the Grand Canyon. But moving on, sorry. Getting too much into the architecture. Okay. Not that rocks aren't interesting, but okay. Carl says to Russell, okay, climb up and we'll just float right over there. And then Russell's trying to climb, and then he can't because I guess he's too weak. And then Carl gets all this up. He's like, oh, great. You telling me we get all the way down here just to be on the wrong end of this rock pile? And then he's like, hey, if I help you get your house to the falls, will you sign off on my badge? And then he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, why don't we walk your house to the falls? And he's like, walk it? And he's like, yeah, after all, we weigh it down. Why not walk it to the falls like a parade balloon, he says. And then so Carl thinks for a second, and then they tie the hose to like their backpack, like backpacks, and then so they both weigh it down, and so they decide to walk to the falls. And then Carl's explaining like some really funny rules. He's like, we are gonna walk to the falls quickly and quietly. There will be no mob dances or flash dancing. And he's like, we got 3 days at best before the helium leaks out of those balloons. And then Russell's like looking at stupid stuff. He's like, ooh, sand, like that type of thing. And then so they like so they're starting to walk to the falls, but then on their way, like as they're walking through the jungle, like obviously being that typical kid, he's like, oh, I don't want to walk anymore. Can we stop? And then so when he goes to take a bathroom break, he actually meets what he thought was, again, he thinks is a snipe. He meets a giant bird creature. I don't have the bookmark because I didn't make it. I tried to. It was difficult. Deal with it. His name is Kevin. It's a giant bird. Yeah, I know. So it's this giant bird that they're riding on the cover of on the thing. So he's this giant bird creature. I think he's a mixture of all different types of birds. And they're like, and he's like, oh, do they like chocolate? And he's saying to Mr. Fredricksen, and while he has his back turned, oh, I found a snipe, and he's describing Kevin to him. And Mr. Fredricksen is all like, oh yeah, sure. And then he's like, do they like chocolate? And then Mr. Fredricksen or Carl is like, oh yeah, they love. He's like, chocolate. And then he turns around and he sees a giant bird. He's like, Russell, get away from that thing! And obviously, Kevin like snatches him and he's like tossing him into the air and he's like playing with them. And obviously when Carl tries to protect Russell and get him away from him, Kevin gets all really protective, and then Russell says, oh no, Kevin, Mr. Fredricksen is nice. And then Kevin likes to bonk Mr. Fredricksen or Carl on the head with his beak, and it makes a loud clunking noise. And so then he asks, can we keep him? And obviously he says no, but then Kevin follows them anyway, because Russell is like leading a trail of chocolate behind them. And then he's like, I see you back there, and he tries to hide behind rocks, and he's like, go ahead, shoo. But then you hear in the distance, hey, are you okay over there? And then he's like, there shouldn't be anybody out here. This is a barren land or whatever. And then so, you hear a man's voice, what's going on? So, but then you see a figure in the distance, and he's like, oh, hello, sir, thank goodness. And then you hear the figure in the distance say, I can smell you. And then and then Carl's like, what? You can smell us? And then you hear the figure say it again, I can smell you. And then you're thinking, that's a weird thing to say. And then you get closer, and you notice it's actually two rocks, like layered like this, and they look like a man, but they're not. And they're like, hey, that one looks like a turtle, and that one looks like a dog. And then it actually is a dog. And this dog's name is Doug. And he's very special. He's not the typical dog, because, when Russell is learning that he's trained, like, you could teach him to sit and that, like, shake paw like a normal dog does. You could say, speak. He told him to speak. And then he says, hi there. And then they both, like, stiffen up, and they're like, did that dog just say hi there? And they're like, yes, I did. I can speak and Doug's like, oh, yes, I can speak very well. And he's like, you're my new master, and I love you. And then obviously Carl's all freaked out because dogs aren't supposed to talk. Now, Doug can talk because his old owner, or his technical owner, gave him made a special collar that I guess with certain frequencies and whatever, he gave him the ability to talk. Now, I think this technology would be awesome if this thing really existed, but we're going to move on. But yeah, now Doug is along for the ride, so now we got like a parade of weirdness going on. We got a giant bird, we got a talking dog, typical road trips, right? But, again, Mr. Fredricksen is really trying to get to the falls, but, like, stuff keeps getting in the way, like Banksy Boo here, but, stuff keeps getting in the way, like, the dogs that Doug is friends with, like, he's part of their pack or whatever, they think that Mr. Fredricksen or Carl and Russell want to steal this precious bird that this person is looking for that lives in the Paradise Falls area. Now they take him away and they go to like show him to the master, and they're like, and he's confused. When they meet the master, he's confused because he sees the floating house. He's like, you came in that? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, oh no. And he's like, oh no, my dog's made a mistake. You're not here for my bird. And he's like, wait, are you Charles Muntz? Apparently that guy that Carl idolized as a child is still alive somehow. He's just incredibly old, I assume. I don't know, but answer that one for me. But, he invites him inside, and then they start talking about stuff, and then they like have dinner, and as they're talking, Russell accidentally exposes that he has a giant bird friend. Now, Mr. Muntz has been looking for this giant bird for a long, long time. Obviously, he's looked for it since he was young, and obviously we know now that they're talking about Kevin, and now Mr. Muntz sees that Carl befriended Kevin, and now in a way he now knows that Carl's gonna get in the way like other people. So now Mr. Muntz is after them and Kevin. So now they try to run out, and they're running away. But then when they come to a cliff, they like float away because of the house. But then Kevin gets bit in the leg by a dog, and then Kevin gets hurt. And then Kevin's actually a girl. It's exposed earlier in the film. She has babies, and then so they have to carry her like with the house to the to her babies in her rock house. And like Russell is saying about how the wilderness is so wild, and like how it was never how he expected, and how he really wished that his father, who's really busy, would come out on camping, and how they used to like be closer before I guess he got more busy with work. And he says about this ice cream place that they used to eat at and stuff. And then they finally get to Kevin's house, but then when they get there, they're tying up the house, and then Kevin's starting to run, but then Mr. Muntz is right behind them, and he shoots like a net launcher, and it catches him. And then Mr. Muntz in a way kind of gives him Carl a choice, because he takes a lantern and he smashes it and it goes against the house. So in a way Carl has a problem, either save Kevin or get the house, and try to save the house, and whatever. So obviously he chooses the house, and obviously Mr. Muntz gets Kevin, and then Kevin gets taken away, and then Carl yells at Russell saying how he never wanted any of this. And then they finally get to Paradise Falls, but then Russell takes his badge thing, like his badge pelt thing, and he tosses it. He's like, "Here, I don't want this anymore." And then Carl goes inside, and he sits down, and then he actually decides to read the Ellie's Adventure book again. And he opens it, and then he's like, all upset about what happened with Russell and Kevin. And then when he's about to close it, because it said in the book, it said things I'm going to do, and he thought she never filled it in, because they never went to Paradise Falls. That's what it was meant for. And when he was about to close it, the page peeled, and you could see a little corner of a picture, and then there was more to the book. So he actually opened as all the pictures that they had from when they were young, like when they got married, and when they as they grew up together. And then on the last page, it's a picture of them as elderly people, but it's in their two chairs, and there's a little note that says, "Thanks for the adventure, now go have a new one, love, Ellie." I think this is a beautiful part of the film. It's very emotional, it's beautiful. And then so Carl, I think, gets inspired, and then so Carl goes to apologize to Russell, but then Russell takes a leaf blower and some balloons and goes to float to go save Kevin. And now Carl wants to help Russell, but obviously he can't get the house back up because too many balloons were popped in that fire. So he decides to throw all the furniture out of the house so the house would float again. So the house is floating, and then obviously Russell fails at trying to save Kevin. He gets tied up within 5 seconds, and then as he's Mr. Muntz ties him to a chair, and then he puts him on that door that opens in airplanes, and so he would fall out. So Carl saves him from that, and he's like, "I'm gonna go get Kevin, you stay here." And then he's like, "But I want to help." And then he's like, "I don't want your help, I want you safe." So Carl goes in to save Kevin, and then so he distracts all the other dogs by taking a tennis ball off his cane, and he throws it, and then obviously gets Kevin out of the cage. But then obviously Charles Muntz finds out about it, and then he tries to hurt Carl through swords, and they have a fight. But then obviously they get outside. They're on top of the blimp and they're like climbing a ladder or whatever. And they're like get outside. And then Charles says about sending a certain like an air flight of dogs. So these dogs know how to fly planes. And so they bite a chew toy and then they shoot tranquilizer darts. Yeah, I don't know, but moving on. But Russell finds a way to